The underestimation begins. The Zorvath Empire had conquered countless worlds. To them, war was nothing but a routine, a game where the strong crushed the weak, and the weak had no choice but to submit. The name Zorvath itself struck fear into the hearts of civilizations across the galaxy. Their fleet was vast, their technology unmatched, and their warriors bred for battle. No species had ever resisted them for long, at least not successfully. So when their scouts detected a small primitive planet on the edge of a forgotten star system, they barely paid attention. Earth. The Zorvath High Command analyzed the reports. The planet was rich in resources, its inhabitants were intelligent but biologically fragile, and their weapons were laughably outdated compared to Zorvath war machines. It was an easy target, a planet that would fall without resistance. Fleet Commander Varric Thal sat in his command chair, staring at the holographic display of Earth. His crimson eyes glowed with confidence as he spoke to his officers. "This will be a simple operation," he said, his voice calm, almost bored. "We land, we take control, and within a few cycles, they will bow before the Empire." A murmur of agreement spread through the command deck. The Zorvath had done this 100 times before. Why would this be any different? The invasion fleet was assembled. 20 warships, each armed with plasma cannons and orbital strike capabilities, descended toward Earth's atmosphere. Their shimmering shields cut through the clouds like blades through silk. The human defenses were pathetic in comparison. Outdated missiles, weak energy shields, and a few planetary defense stations that wouldn't last more than a few minutes against Zorvath firepower. Varric watched as the first Zorvath landing ships touched down on Earth's surface. Their mission was simple: establish dominance, crush resistance, force submission. But something was strange. There was no panic, no desperate cries for mercy, no immediate surrender. Varric's sharp mind picked up on the unusual calmness in the human reaction. Why weren't they afraid? Every species the Zorvath had ever invaded reacted the same way: terror, chaos, and instant defeat. But the humans, they didn't run. They watched. They waited. On the ground, the Zorvath warriors stepped out of their landing craft, expecting a broken species, too weak to fight back. But instead, they saw armed soldiers, standing in formation, their weapons raised, their eyes steady. These were not beings crippled by fear. Varric narrowed his eyes at the live feed from the ground forces. "Why are they not surrendering?" he muttered. His second-in-command, a seasoned officer named Prevails, sneered. "It does not matter. Their weapons are nothing but toys compared to ours." But Varric wasn't convinced. Something felt wrong. A transmission came through the fleet's comms. A human general, standing tall and composed, spoke in a clear, steady voice. "You are not the first to think we are weak." Varric's brow furrowed. The arrogance in the human's tone was unexpected. "And you will not be the last to regret it." The transmission ended, and then the first shots were fired. The battle had begun, and for the first time in Zorvath history, an easy conquest was about to turn into their greatest nightmare. The Zorvath warriors had expected a swift and effortless victory. Their shock troops, clad in advanced armor and wielding plasma rifles, marched forward with the confidence of an unstoppable force. They had done this countless times before: invade, overpower, and force surrender. But Earth did not react like the others. The moment the first Zorvath soldier stepped forward, a sudden explosion tore through the air. A hidden mine detonated beneath their feet, sending alien bodies flying. Plasma-resistant armor cracked, and the battlefield was filled with the screams of wounded warriors. Fleet Commander Varric Thal, watching from his warship, narrowed his crimson eyes. "An ambush," he muttered. Prevails, his second-in-command, scoffed. "Primitive tactics. They delay the inevitable." Varric remained silent, his instincts whispering something different. The humans were not panicking. They were prepared. On the ground, the Zorvath warriors quickly regrouped. adjusting their strategy. Their soldiers raised their energy shields, advancing in coordinated formations. The Zorvath doctrine was clear: overwhelm the enemy, break their spirit, and crush them before they could resist. But as they advanced, human snipers hidden in buildings and forests opened fire. Bullets, enhanced with armor-piercing technology, pierced Zorvath helmets. Plasma bolts followed, striking with deadly precision. Unlike previous invasions, where resistance forces scattered in fear, the humans fought with terrifying discipline. And then, the sky lit up. Earth's anti-air defenses, thought to be outdated and ineffective, suddenly came to life. Missiles streaked through the sky, locking onto Zorvath landing craft. Explosions thundered across the atmosphere as warships were struck. Some vessels crashed in flames, others lost control, tumbling through the air. Varric Thal's eyes widened slightly. This was not supposed to happen. He turned to his officers. How did they disable our jamming systems? They weren't supposed to detect us this quickly. One of his analysts, a nervous Zorvath technician, hesitated before responding. It seems they've adapted. Their technology isn't as primitive as we assumed. Varric's jaw tightened. He had underestimated these creatures. That was a mistake the Zorvath did not often make. On the battlefield, human forces moved in strange, unpredictable ways. They did not fight like the others, species that relied on brute strength or single-minded aggression. The humans used tactics, deception, and strategy. Zorvath warriors advanced down an empty street, only to be trapped in a crossfire from hidden human squads. Some Zorvath soldiers rushed into buildings, seeking cover, only to trigger booby traps that sent entire floors collapsing on them. And then, the human tanks arrived. Massive mechanized war machines rolled forward, their cannons unleashing hellfire upon the invaders. Zorvath vehicles, though more advanced, were suddenly struggling to maneuver in Earth's dense urban environments. One of the human commanders, General Ethan Carter, stood atop a command post, watching the battlefield unfold. He smiled grimly as he spoke into his comms. "They thought we were weak," he said. "Let's show them how wrong they were." On the Zorvath command ship, Varric Thal clenched his fists. This was no longer an easy invasion. This was war. The battlefield was supposed to be one-sided. The Zorvath Empire had conquered hundreds of planets. Their military was vast, their weapons advanced, and their tactics refined over centuries of warfare. But on Earth, things were not going as planned. Commander Varric Thal watched in disbelief as his forces struggled to advance. His warriors, elite soldiers trained in planetary domination, were being pushed back. Plasma bolts cut through the air, but the humans, those weak, fragile creatures, refused to break. No, they did more than resist. They fought back. And they fought back hard. On the ground, Zorvath battalions attempted a coordinated assault, using their superior numbers and technology to overwhelm human forces. Hover tanks rolled in, their energy cannons firing devastating blasts at defensive human positions. But the humans were already prepared. From the ruined buildings and alleyways, small human strike teams launched an ambush. Rocket launchers and EMP grenades rained down on the advancing tanks, disabling their shields before well-placed explosive rounds obliterated them. The Zorvath did not understand. Every time they adjusted their strategy, the humans adapted faster than expected. Every time they thought the battle was won, the humans turned the tide. The Zorvath captain, his armor scorched from combat, barked into his communicator. "Where is our air support? We need reinforcements." His words were cut off by a deafening explosion. Above them, the sky erupted in fire. Earth's hidden air force had arrived. Stealth bombers and fighter jets, thought to be primitive by Zorvath standards, suddenly proved devastating. Their pilots were ruthless, precise, and fearless. They wove through the air, dodging enemy fire, and launched precision strikes on exposed Zorvath ground troops. Fleet Commander Varric Thal's eyes narrowed. His second-in-command, Turek Vos, clenched his fists. They weren't supposed to have this level of resistance, he growled. Their fleets were weak, their weapons outdated. They were hiding their strength, Varek muttered. His mind raced. This wasn't a desperate resistance. This was a calculated trap. The humans had let the Zorveth believe they were weak, let them lower their guard, only to unleash hell the moment the enemy was overconfident. Commander, our forces are losing ground, a Zorveth officer reported. Casualties are rising. Our drop zones are compromised. Varek exhaled slowly. This was not what he had planned. The Zorveth always won through overwhelming force. But this time, it wasn't enough. Humanity had something else, something terrifying. They had the will to win. The battlefield was a nightmare of smoke, fire, and chaos. Explosions lit up the sky, and the screams of wounded Zorveth warriors echoed through the ruined streets. The invasion that was supposed to be swift and decisive had turned into a brutal war, one that the Zorveth were starting to lose. Commander Varek Thel stood inside his command vessel, watching the disaster unfold on the holomap. His elite warriors were being slaughtered. His air support was shredded by human fighters. His reinforcements had landed, but even they were struggling. This is impossible, Turek Vos growled, slamming his fist on the table. They are primitive. They should have fallen by now. Varek's eyes remained locked on the screen. Primitive. No, the humans were something far worse. They were prepared. Down below, the human forces moved with unnerving precision. They knew the terrain. They used the ruins as cover. They set traps that crippled Zorveth war machines. Their weapons, though outdated by Zorveth standards, were being used with deadly efficiency. And then, there was the worst part. Human soldiers refused to break. A squad of Zorveth shock troopers had pinned a human unit behind a collapsed building. Plasma fire rained down, scorching the rubble. The humans had no way out. Or so the Zorveth thought. Suddenly, the human soldiers charged. They didn't retreat. They didn't cower. They ran straight at the enemy, dodging between bursts of plasma fire. The Zorveth troopers hesitated for a fraction of a second. A fatal mistake. With brutal efficiency, the humans closed the distance and engaged in melee combat. Blades flashed. Bullets tore through armor. Screams filled the air. In seconds, the entire Zorveth squad was wiped out. Varek Thal gritted his teeth. This wasn't just resistance. This was a counteroffensive. These creatures, he muttered, are fighting as if this is their last stand. Turek Vos sneered. So we burn them down. Bomb everything. Leave no survivors. Varek turned sharply. You think I haven't considered that? We've already begun orbital bombardments. But even as he said the words, he knew it wasn't working. The humans had dug in deep. They had bunkers, underground tunnels, hidden weapon caches. The Zorveth had expected a conventional war, not this brutal, relentless insurgency. And then the worst news came. Commander, an officer cried. New enemy signatures detected. They're launching a space assault. Varek's blood ran cold. What? The officer hesitated, disbelief written all over his face. Humanity's space fleet. It's attacking our capital ships. Varek's eyes narrowed. Impossible. Their fleet is weak. They should have been destroyed. The officer gulped. They were hiding their true forces. At that moment, a massive explosion shook the command vessel. The lights flickered. Sirens blared. Turek Vos grabbed onto the control panel. What was that? The officer's voice was barely above a whisper. They've boarded us. Varek's claws tightened into fists. The humans had just brought the war to them. The Zorveth command vessel trembled under the impact of explosions. Sirens wailed as emergency lights flickered across the warship's control deck. Commander Varek Thal gripped the edge of the holotable, his sharp eyes scanning the chaos unfolding on the battlefield. This was not how the invasion was supposed to go. The humans, the so-called weak species, were now inside his ship. Seal the bulkheads. Deploy all available forces to the breach points. Varric snarled. Turek Vos, his second-in-command, was already gripping his weapon. How did they get through our defenses? This ship is equipped with the most advanced security measures. But Varric already knew the answer. They had underestimated humans from the very beginning. The humans had likely used stealth tactics, precision strikes, and raw aggression to bypass their automated defenses. The Zorveth rely on overwhelming firepower, but the humans relied on adaptability, strategy, and an unwillingness to lose. A new alert flashed across the control panel. Unauthorized access detected in Engineering Bay. Varric's mandibles clenched. If the humans reached the ship's core, they could disable shields, weapons, and even trigger a catastrophic overload. We will crush them. Turek Vos spat, marching toward the exit with a group of elite Zorveth warriors. I will bring you their corpses. But Varric was no longer so sure. Down below, in the twisting corridors of the command vessel, human forces moved like ghosts. They weren't just here to fight. They were here to dismantle the ship from within. A squad of human soldiers advanced through the dimly lit hallways, their weapons raised. Their leader, Captain James Carter, glanced at the device on his wrist. A motion scanner. Enemies everywhere. Keep moving, Carter whispered. We have 5 minutes before they reroute reinforcements. His team pressed forward, moving with terrifying efficiency. They had studied Zorvath battle doctrine and knew exactly how their enemies would respond. At the next intersection, plasma bolts tore through the air. The Zorveth had set up a defensive position. Heavy gunners stood behind energy barriers, their weapons glowing with deadly heat. Any normal force would have been pinned down, but humans were not normal. Carter threw up a hand signal. 2 soldiers broke off, moving along the side corridors. The enemy was focused on the main hallway. They never saw the flanking attack coming. 2 silenced shots echoed. The Zorveth gunners collapsed, their helmets shattered. Within moments, the human squad cleared the hallway and pressed on toward engineering. Back on the bridge, alarms screamed louder. Varric watched in stunned silence as his security feeds showed human soldiers disabling automated turrets, bypassing door locks, and killing his warriors with terrifying speed. These aren't just soldiers, he growled. These are predators. The humans had waited for the perfect moment to strike. And now, they weren't just fighting back. They were winning. The warship trembled as another explosion rocked its core. Commander Varric Thal staggered, his claws gripping the holotable for balance. The battlefield was no longer under his control. The humans had made sure of that. On the security feeds, Zorveth warriors lay scattered across the corridors. Some were dead, some were wounded, but all had one thing in common. They had been overpowered. This is impossible, Turek Vos growled, his voice laced with disbelief. They don't even have the numbers. How are they doing this? Varric's mandibles twitched. He knew exactly how. Humans were not bound by the same rigid strategies that the Zorveth followed. They adapted. They took risks that no sane Zorveth commander would ever consider. And worst of all, they'd never stopped. Another alert flashed across the command panel. Engineering Bay compromised. Reactor core destabilizing. Varric's breath caught. If the humans had control of the reactor, then they had 2 choices: disable the ship or destroy it completely. Turek, take the remaining forces and stop them, he ordered, his voice tight. Do not let them reach the primary controls. But even as he said it, he could see the fear in his second-in-command's eyes. Turek was a warrior. He had crushed entire civilizations beneath his boots. But this was something different. The humans had already bypassed the ship's security, outmaneuvered their forces, and taken key locations in record time. Turek hesitated. That hesitation was a death sentence. The doors to the bridge exploded inward. The force of the blast sent Varric reeling. Smoke and debris clouded his vision as a hail of gunfire tore through the room. Zorveth guards were cut down in seconds. And then, through the smoke, the humans emerge. They weren't like the soldiers the Zorveth had fought in the past. These humans didn't fight for glory. They didn't fight for honor. They fought to win. Captain James Carter stepped forward, his rifle trained directly at Varric. His armor was scared, his face smudged with soot, but his eyes were cold and sharp. "Commander Varric Thal," Carter said, his voice calm, "steady. You've lost." Varric's mandibles clicked in frustration. He wanted to deny it. He wanted to believe that his species, the great and powerful Zorveth, could turn this around. But he couldn't. His ship was compromised. His forces were scattered. And standing before him was proof that humanity was not weak. It was something far, far worse. It was relentless. Carter stepped closer. "Surrender. Now." Varric's claws clenched into fists. This wasn't over. Not yet. The silence in the Zorveth command bridge was suffocating. Smoke curled through the air, the scent of burning metal and ozone thick in the confined space. Commander Varric Thal stood motionless, his sharp claws curled into fists at his sides, his mind racing as Captain James Carter took another step forward, his rifle aimed straight at the Zorveth commander's chest. "You've lost," Carter repeated, his voice steady and firm. His eyes locked onto Varric's with an intensity that sent a ripple of unease through the Zorveth officers still standing. Varric's mandibles clicked together in frustration. His mind screamed at him to fight back, to resist. But deep down, he knew the truth. There was no victory left to claim. His ship was compromised. His warriors had been outmaneuvered, outmatched, and utterly humiliated. The battle that should have been an effortless conquest had turned into an overwhelming defeat. The humans had done what no species in the galaxy had ever managed. They had broken the Zorveth, and they had done it with sheer, relentless determination. Varric's second-in-command, Turak Vos, lay slumped against the wall, his chest armor scorched and torn. His breath came in ragged gasps as he struggled to lift his weapon, but it was futile. The fight had been taken from them, beaten out of them, one brutal lesson at a time. "This is not how it ends," Varric growled, his voice barely more than a whisper. "The Zorvath are warriors. We do not yield." Carter's gaze never wavered. "Then you're not as smart as I thought." The coldness in his words stung. Humans didn't fight for pride. They didn't fight for glory. They fought to survive. And when they fought to win. The humans could have taken prisoners. They could have disabled the ship and forced negotiations. But the Zorvath had crossed a line. They had come expecting to crush humanity beneath their boots, to wipe them out like so many weaker species before them. Instead, they had awakened something terrible. Varric took a step back, his mind scrambling for any possible way out. The humans wouldn't let him escape, and surrender was a fate worse than death. But there was still one option left. If he couldn't win, then he could destroy everything. His claws twitched toward the emergency override on his wrist console. One command. One final act of defiance. The ship's core would go critical, tearing this vessel apart and taking every last human with it. But before his fingers could reach the controls, a gunshot rang out. Pain lanced through his arm. He let out a guttural snarl, his console sparking as blood splattered across the floor. Carter had fired without hesitation. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Carter said coldly, lowering his rifle just slightly. "You think you still have control, but you don't. This isn't your war anymore. It's ours now." Varric's breath came in short, ragged bursts. He had never feared an enemy before. Not like this. Not with this suffocating finality. The Zorvath had underestimated humanity, and in doing so, they had made the greatest mistake in their history. Carter stepped forward, looking down at the fallen Zorvath commander. His voice was calm, almost pitying. "You thought we were weak," he said. "You thought we were prey. Now the galaxy will remember what happens when you make that mistake." Varric stared up at him, finally understanding. The war wasn't over. It had just begun.